The liberals that say, well, just ship new people in, it doesn't matter. It's wrong about human nature and culture migrating. Culture migrates, and what will happen in Europe is you'll have a highly atomized, very dysfunctional, antagonistic society that, if you believe people like David Betts, could descend into civil war. But what Johnson was desperately worried about was a correction or a crash or a recession on his watch. And I think it's only my theory, but I think he turned on the floodgates of this just to get anything happening. Most northern cities from the Midlands to the north have 20% of adults on some form of benefits, and you've got opioid epidemics and massive social problems. I argue it would have been cheaper to keep the factories open. We are much more influential than our votes or our profile would indicate, actually. And if you're a sensible party and you produce good work, then you'd be surprised how, when you throw a rock into the pool, the ripples literally go everywhere. We've advocated the use of Ascension Island to stop the flow flat overnight. Just build an offshore detention facility, get out of the ECHR and all the protocols. We've been arguing this for 5 years. Most politicians won't get anywhere near this, but I'm just going to say it.
William Clouston, leader of the SDP, thank you so much for finding some time this morning to chat with me. I'm most appreciative.
Good. No, it's good to be here, Lewis. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Still, I think in the news just about is the march of September the 13th down in London, where at least 150,000 people, I suspect quite a lot more, but we'll never know. Despite modern technology, apparently we can't know how many people were at a march. An awful lot of people were on this march in central London. What are your thoughts on that march? How did you perceive it, and what do you think the march was about?
No, that's a good question. I think very broadly, it's about mainstream discontent with the way the government, where the country's governed, and the undermining of self-confidence in the cultural majority. So I know it's associated with raising flags and putting St. George's crosses on lampposts and Union Jacks up and things. And that's an interesting thing, because actually we're not terribly flag wavy as a country. You go to some other countries, France, or go to the United States and you see a lot of flags. But I view it as a sort of cry for help. I think what's happened very broadly is that the sort of mainstream cultural majority, the white British majority, feels itself to be underappreciated and disprivileged in not just in the broad culture, having its history denigrated and so on, but in actual policy. I think people feel that people say, "I want my country back," and a lot of people think that's quite a broad claim, and if you ask people to explain that, they often find it difficult. But it's downstream of the great liberalization, about downstream of social and economic liberalism, which people have had for 20, 30, 40 years possibly, and people are feeling a little bit unmoored. And I think that's the reason for it. I saw it quite close up because the SDP, not by it wasn't deliberate. In fact, it was we were a little bit disappointed that the march was on the same day as our national conference, because I thought it might dissuade some people from turning up. But so in the pubs after the conference and things, obviously we met quite a few of the marchers, and it's a broad sweep, isn't it? The BBC will call it far right, but I think the problem with categorizing something like that, I mean, certainly one or two of the speakers probably might be described as far right, and have that history, but in categorizing it like that, the trouble is you actually run out of far right people, certainly in value divides and so on. If you want control of the borders or you want to end mass immigration, that's a mainstream majority view. I mean, you're getting up to 72, 73% now for some of these positions. So you can't really call it even extreme. It's just a mainstream position, which is not shared by the ruling cultural elite. So I hope I've given you a broad answer, but that's my feeling about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I saw it up quite close. I was quite near to the march, and I'd say yes. A, there were an awful lot of people there. B, I didn't
Mm,
see much trouble. But I mean, this is anecdote. There obviously was a bit of trouble, but I think if you look at the sort of the ratio of number of troublemakers to number of non-troublemakers, it was very low
mm,
indeed in absolute terms, and very low relative to a lot of comparative marches, shall we say.
mm, mm,
Most people there were white. I'm not sure if that
mm,
matters, but it was the case. You could interpret that in a few different ways, I suppose. Is it white people who felt they needed to march? Was it white people who felt they were in a position to do it? Would it have been nice to have seen more people of other colours there, or maybe they don't feel the same way about their country? I'm not sure. Um, and I would say it's hard to categorize these days, and it sounds a little bit rude to do it in a way, although it's not meant that this way. But most people, I would say, were sort of from a working class background. But you know, these categories are very smudged, so that perhaps doesn't mean too much either.
mm,
But certainly, I got a sense overall that people were out there to be friendly, to sort of make a point, whatever their point was, to have a go, hopefully find a pub seat to sit on at the end of the day, keep
mm,
out of the rain, which they failed to do, and go home.
mm,
And I thought that represented Britain, or England, if you like, particularly. But no, I think Britain in a very positive light.
mm. Yeah, I think so. I think I mean, you know, people have the right to turn up and march on issues, and quite often actually the if you look at the history of these big marches in Whitehall, quite a lot of them are just flatly ignored if the march isn't in line with the with what the governing elite wants to do. Good examples of things like the countryside marches and things like that, you know, that went ahead, or even you could even say the marches against the Iraq War, you know, which very large marches didn't make any difference at all. So the governments are quite happy to have marches go on and it not to change a great deal. But there is something afoot. I agree, there is something afoot, and it's quite interesting.
What would have been your response to that march if you were in power and that march happened? Because I don't think I heard much from the government, a little bit, but not much from the government in response to this clearly very big march. And you would expect some sort of response. What would your response have been to that march?
Well, if I was in government, I'm not sure and if I'd been in government for some time, I'm not sure the march would have happened because, I mean, partly as a political project, what we're trying to do is to get the cultural elite, and it's all the elites actually. I mean, I know it sounds trite, you know, to say this, but there is a misalignment between what the sort of 15% of educated new elite think and their values, which don't vary very much. I mean, you know, if you've gone through the university system and you've been educated at Oxbridge and you go through the system of think tanks or charities and then straight into politics, largely you think the same things. And I think, you know, and this is right across the parties, by the way. So if you actually look at the parliamentary, not the memberships, but the parliamentary representation of the big parties, they're pretty much the same. It's very difficult to put much between many of the Labour MPs and the Tory Liberals. Anyway, there are probably about 10, maybe 20 Tories that have a sort of culturally traditionalist view, but that's different. But the country as a whole thinks differently to this. And there's a clear misalignment between the governing and the governed. So if we were in government, you'd have a national border, for instance, so people wouldn't be upset about people just rocking up on the south coast and being successful in obtaining asylum and then getting family reunion and so on. So that people do feel that is problematic. And actually, from a sort of old school left point of view, it is problematic because welfare state is meant to be a contributory system, and that's how Beveridge envisaged it. And of course, people feel unhappy if people turn up having contributed nothing to it at all, and then perceived to get significant benefits from it. So, you know, things like the South Coast, there is a scheme that would do it. It's you've got to get out of you've got to dismantle the international legal architecture, which is about 70 years out of date. And you've got to have probably offshore detention, somewhere like Ascension. But if you did that, you would solve that problem. And then on things like mass immigration, which is another preoccupation of the marchers, you'd have to end it. I mean, we've had ludicrously high levels of migration, particularly under Boris Johnson. I mean, I don't think Boris Johnson was fit to govern anyway for various reasons, but I think his policies on mass immigration are just utterly reckless. I mean, to have 1.3 million gross in a year and to have net migration of 750,000 plus is extremely reckless socially and economically. You could demonstrate this by just looking at something like housing, for instance, where the total number of housing completions of new homes in the years that this was happening was sort of 170,000 new homes. Well, that's not enough houses for the net migration.
So where do people go? So where did there's over 1 million gross coming in? Okay, maybe 750,000 or something net. Where do they go? Like literally, if there's not the houses being built, where are these people going? Because they're living somewhere. They're not. Most of them aren't on the streets.
No, I mean what it does is they're through the system. Obviously, you've got a large housing stock, and if you perennially fail to provide new space, it just puts more pressure on that stock. So it's a distribution at the tough end of the distribution. It's people bunking in semi-detached homes in Wembley, 24 to a house, and doing 3 shifts. Hotbedding, and just next to that it's beds in sheds, which has been written about. So that's at one end, but at the other end is just people. There's too many people per square foot. I mean, that's the result of it, and it's a desperately reckless policy. It's an interesting one actually culturally, because your students may be interested in this, because what's happened in politics is that to put it crudely, I'm going to put it very crudely. You've got two. The liberal left system of diversity has 2 different groups, and it's a very crude characterization. But you have, white oppressors who are the patriarchy, the Western civilization people, the people that are in charge of the society theoretically, and then the oppressed, who are various minorities of various kinds, ethnic minorities, cultural minorities, religious minorities, and women who aren't a minority anyway, but they're put in it. And that's the crude lens through which all of this is seen. And if you have that lens, it makes criticism of any minority category, or even an empirical observation about a category, impossible. So it distorts the entire narrative. And I know a little bit about housing and built a few houses myself. I'm a town planner and surveyor by background, and I've always taken a keen interest in it. But it's astonishing, Lewis, how the debate in this country is totally infantilized. It's like, you can blame the supply side all the time, and I do. There's a big collapse in state sector provision in housing. Post-war, the state outbuilt the private sector, but the sector's been basically demolished, and I think that's a major problem. That's a cause of the housing crisis. But another cause must be sheer numbers of immigrants. If you import over a 10-year period several million people and you don't provide houses for them, it's got to cause stress, and it's got to cause pressure in the housing market, and it's got to bid up rents and things like that. So if you point that out and you say the other side of the equation is as the demand side, from very, very high levels, reckless levels of immigration, people just close down. And it's Lewis, it's the people that should be making the, or at least if they're not enumerate, should be able to recognize it. People, charities like Shelter will not acknowledge the pressure from immigration. So I always say when I debate them, where do you expect people to live in thin air? What do you think will happen? So I think as a party, the SDP, we do try and see things, get causes right, and try and produce remedies based on a thoughtful appreciation of what true cause is in these domains, and we won't get a solution to something like housing unless you're honest about immigration, and you won't get any again, putting it crudely, you won't get a liberal progressive being honest about immigration, because their value system prevents them from ever criticizing any minority in any way. So immigrants, a lot of my family are immigrants, and a lot of us are from very broad backgrounds now as family. So that's where we are. We're all in the same boat. I can't be against immigrants, but I can be against mass immigration if it causes a problem with the housing market, and I can point it out. But unfortunately, many of my opponents, it's just like they're incapable of even registering it. So that's where we are.
No, you're not allowed to. It's verboten, isn't it? And it's a strange business, because for so long the discussion has been set as you're either for or against immigration.
Mm.
It's like you're kind of either for or against chocolate. You could say, well, is it okay for me to eat chocolate? Well,
Mm.
probably, unless you've got a special dietary issue,
Yeah.
unless you're eating only chocolate. If you're eating only chocolate, then I'm
Mm.
against you doing that. I'm against chocolate. If you're eating
Yes.
one chocolate bar a week or a day, even, I don't know, whatever, then I'm
Yeah.
pro it because chocolate's nice and it probably helps you relax and you've got to
Mm.
enjoy life. So it's
Mm.
not for or against immigration. It's
Mm.
for or against mass immigration. Having said that, I notice that some politicians now, I mean, you say that politicians won't kind of discuss this issue reasonably, and you're right. But the Overton window, as people talk about now, the Overton window does seem to be shifting. Maybe the language used is very carefully chosen, but nonetheless, people are talking more about issues of large scale migration,
Mm.
trying to separate out the idea of migrants as individuals. It's not their fault versus the concept of huge numbers of people. That's a problem, but it's not a personal issue against migrants. But there are some politicians and some parties now who are talking about, let's say, a net zero migration policy for a while to sort of let things settle down. So
Mm.
net migration, you would still have some migration, but overall net migration would be literally zero, which you could simplify as zero migration. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Paddy O'Flynn. I mean, firstly, I take your point entirely on the individuals. I mean, on the chaos on the South Coast. Again, I'm on record. I've given lots of interviews and actually did a film on this. Now, the migrants on the South Coast, the illegal migrants, because they are breaching the '71 Immigration Act, so they are illegal. But they're making perfectly rational choice. And if I were them, I'd probably consider making that choice. You know, I've done some work in Ghana for a medical charity over a number of years, and I've worked there. And the last project I did, you know, I was chatting to the team, and there's about 30 people on the project, most of whom wanted to come to Europe. So the demand is huge, and it's perfectly rational. And the you know, the Sappho, where we were doing the work, you know, the best bar in the village, of course, was owned by a brother whose brother was in South London earning reasonable wages, and that's why I could. So it makes perfect rational sense. I but yeah, I mean, I think Paddy O'Flynn floated this idea of net zero migration to Richard Tyson. I think they picked it up for a while. I don't think it's a terribly. I think it's a bit. Net zero migration is a good rhetorical device, but it's not terribly rational. I don't think you can. I would want to end mass what I would call mass immigration, crazy numbers, net figures of 450,000 or 250,000, still massively higher than we ever had before. You need some skilled migration always, but the what is called skilled migration by successive governments, particularly the Tories, is not skilled. I mean, you can't if you're talking about salary caps of sort of 29,000, 30,000. I don't think you can make a case for that. I think what you're doing, I think, again, to put it crudely, governments have given up on training and trying to get British adults off welfare into work, and they're using mass immigration as a quick fix, a drug to plug labour gaps. And it's lazy and it's short-termist and it's a form of instant gratification, but it's extremely costly down the line. I mean, you know, so a lot of the data's in for Denmark and Finland and Holland, and even ONS admit now that a lot of the categories, the broad categories of low skilled migration that we get are fiscally negative. I mean, it starts fiscally negative and it remains so as people age. So it's a disaster. But unfortunately, you'd have to have a government that was prepared to take some pain in adapting itself off this addiction, because it's totally addicted. I mean, you speak to people like David Goodhart, who's an expert in demography, he's written about it and he's at PX producing work on it. He says you can't, clicking your fingers and saying we're going to, end mass immigration overnight would be, it'd have very, very severe economic effects. And I'd be in favour of it being done over as short as period possible. But no, you shouldn't pretend that you can click your fingers and just get that literally overnight. There'd be a severe.
You can't go cold turkey, you say.
No, well, you need to go cold turkey to some extent. There needs to be some pain. I think one of the things that we're trying to encourage people to be realistic on is is again get away from the short-termism and the high time preference in politics and among the public. I mean, I think the public, in a sense, are almost in the same position as the politicians here, and saying, "Don't, I'm not prepared to take any pain, so let's get more debt or let's get more short-term solutions." When in fact, you need a government that's going to say this might hurt a wee bit, but we'll have a better future if we do it. So,
But it
to get
seems,
my
sorry, William, it seems that one of the reasons that governments don't seem to want to reduce migration levels is because they're very fearful of the economic impact, and perhaps particularly the numbers that will come out. So each month and each quarter, I as a layperson hear on the news, GDP is doing this,
Mm,
employment figures are doing that. Whether they're too believable, I don't know, and I'm not particularly interested in GDP as an absolute, because it basically just correlates with population size.
mm,
But GDP per capita is perhaps more interesting. But we
mm.
see these numbers. It seems that governments are very, very keen to see those numbers, employment levels, GDP levels, whatever, going up, and that
Yeah,
it's just not allowed for those numbers to temporarily go down. And that's where they keep taking the drum, because if you bring in immigrants, you would, broadly speaking, you'll get employment numbers, absolute numbers going up, GDP absolute going up, because you've just got a bigger country in terms of population.
I think that's very well made. I think that's spot on, in fact, because I think that's exactly what happened to Boris Johnson. I mean, Boris Johnson's sort of liberal anyway, he's not any sort of conservative. Always look at what people do, not what they say. Um, but yeah, I mean, his government, I think, panicked, and I think he was in a position where so many of his political opponents were saying, "You've wrecked the economy. Brexit is a disaster." Well, in fact, actually, on trade, on international trade, if you did a sort of if you did a blind uh, look at just the data through the whole period before and after, it'd be very difficult to see that very much went on actually on the macro
Mm.
data. It's astonishing, yeah, very much. And there are plenty of I mean, fully integrated economies like Italy, you know, have done much worse than semi-detached ones. So but what Johnson was desperately worried about was a correction or a crash or a recession on his watch. And I think it's only my theory, but I think he turned on the floodgates of this just to get anything happening. And I think that's because he couldn't take the medicine. I think that was a mistake that went all the way back to the Brexit campaign, because they said they were unable to say to the public, you might have to have some adaptation that's going to cause a little bit of pain in the short term. I never said that. I mean, Paddy O'Flynn and I were arguing in 2019 for no deal, because we wanted some trade friction, because we thought the EU was a major problem because of our trade deficit with the EU, which is about 100 billion. And you're going to have to correct it, and you might have to be some pain in correcting it. But it's just off the limit. I mean, they just can't do this. So Johnson has lumbered the country with a Boris wave, which will cost billions. I mean, it'll probably cost hundreds of billions in welfare in the end. Disastrous, absolutely disastrous. A perfect example of instant gratification and long-term damage. But that's how, a lot of politicians think.
So if you were in power, William, would you? So there's a couple, 2-3 million or whatever came over during the Boris wave, something like that over the years.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, I don't know the details of how this works. Many of those individuals in Britain won't be British citizens. They'll be on what,
Mm.
long-term visas?
Yeah.
So this is very crude, and I'm not saying this is right. I put it to you as someone who probably knows more about this than I do, but I don't know how into the detail you are on this. Would a solution not be to say, right, once these individuals' visas have run out, 5-year visas or whatever, you
Mm.
effectively say, thank you very much. We value your time in Britain. That's been very helpful. We hope you got something from it
Mm.
too. A
Mm.
boost in income, maybe your English developed even further than it was,
Mm.
experiences, so forth, something for the CV. Thank you
Mm.
for your time. They then go back to their host countries. And that would bring down the numbers of migrants who have come to the country in the last 10 years, because you'd have a higher return rate. And I'll add something to that. Again, I don't know if this works. I'm a nobody who knows nothing about these things. It's easy to talk, but at the same time, what you do is reduce welfare claims. I mean, gosh, that's a tough thing to do, but you reduce welfare claims to encourage some of the 6.5 million adults who are on benefits, some of whom absolutely should be on benefits. absolutely should be, but some probably shouldn't be or should be on less, to encourage them to go into work so they can take the spots of the relatively unskilled migrants who came in through, as you call it, the Boris wave, whose visas have run out and they return home. Where are the holes that one should pick in that idea?
I think basically those ideas are sound, but you're better to not make the mistake in the first place. So having got the wave, and obviously people were invited in many different categories. So you've got a lot, a very big number is students and undergraduates and postgraduates particularly, and then there's a route to remaining in Britain if you're beyond 4 years. So that's a permanent labour migration route which people take up. There were many different schemes for skilled labour programs, and they're different categories. And there were also refugees. People forget about Hong Kong and Ukraine boosting the numbers as well. So there's lots of going on. But on the skilled migration, on the labour migration, people were put on particular schemes, and if they're here for 5 years, they can apply for ILR, indefinite leave to remain, and they effectively are here for good, and they can have family reunion and a route to citizenship from that. And that is the thing that's going to really boost the population numbers, and depending on the categories, people are most politicians won't get anywhere near this, but I'm just going to say it. There are different, culture migrates, people's attributes vary in terms of different populations. There are certain categories of labour migration which will be net fiscally beneficial to you. So I'll give you an example. If you were to import skilled migration from the United States, parts of the EU, Japan, or South Korea, probably fiscally beneficial. On the stats, very high skill you bring in, and because those people are going into higher paid employment, their net contribution to society will be plus. I mean, some of the data coming from Holland would be, say, a lifetime contribution of that category of population would be something like 150,000 euros. But at the flip side, there are some categories of low migration that will literally be, costly to your society by up to half a million per person over a lifetime. It's catastrophically expensive, and so I would argue, just rationally, it's not sensible to have too much of that type of migration. It would just hurt your economy and beggar your state finances in the end. So what you have to do is to take the medicine. Do you remember? I think it was 2019, 2020, just prior to COVID, there was a shortage of skilled long haul
Lorry drivers.
HGV drivers, yeah.
Mm.
And there's great kerfuffle because we're against training. Again, it's the stupidest thing, but you've got to train some people in some of these areas. You can't just leave it to the market. We got used to leaving everything to others when we were in the EU because you've just got a massive pool of labour. Why train anyone when you've got 450 million people who just get Svetlana to do the work that Sally would have done before? And that's what we got, very lazy. But when labour rates went up for that, I was happy. I was actually very pleased because that's how the labour market has to work. And yet again, on something like by the way, some building work going on, so you might hear a little bit of banging.
Yeah. Can you hear any from my end? There's actually building work going on here. Can you hear anything from my end, or no? It's okay.
No. I think we'll be all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the big sector is social care. So having not produced a national care service, which we should have done and planned properly and had a training program, the thing is now in chaos. So you have social care being outsourced to little companies that provide the arms and legs and the workers, and they're importing massive numbers of people from the Philippines, India, Nigeria, Ghana, all sorts of places. Now, I don't think it's rational to do that when you have, as you say, 5.5 million people, 6 million adults on out-of-work benefits, or 9 million out of the labour market in total. I think it would be cheaper to actually boost social care salaries by a third and induce British people to do that work. I think British people will do the work if the gap between benefits or other options and getting paid better is narrowed. So I want the labour market to work properly. It's got to be, if the labour market for for homegrown care workers is not working properly, put up the price, and then you'll get people to do it. And
Because I
again,
think what's happening at the moment is, have I got this right? So care workers are paid very low wages, but they get in-work benefits.
yeah,
Right. So the care home has repressed kind of salaries and overhead costs, but because the staff don't earn a lot. So that's great for them, and it keeps the price down for the individuals, the patients who move into the care home and have to pay the bills of living there.
mm,
But the rest of us are subsidising it through our taxes,
yeah.
so it doesn't cost any less
No,
in the
no,
round.
no. It's as long as it's short. It's the same as Gordon Brown's tax credits scheme, a very silly scheme, which he distorted the labour market with, because what they said was, look, we can afford to bung some voters some money by giving them tax credits, but what you're doing is you're distorting the labour market. You know, firms are not paying people what they should pay. And I think that the state is better off being an active state in the domains that it should concentrate on, which are, you know, public transportation, power generation, water supply, and railways, and those things, and defence. And if it gets that right, it should allow the market to operate efficiently on its own. The government shouldn't be paying, because tax credits were paying part of the salaries of low wage employees. You know, and how long can you do that for? But my basic argument on this is that the the cause of having millions of people out of work is not served by just washing your hands over it and just saying, well, look, we can't get these people back to work, so we'll just employ millions of people from elsewhere. It's mad.
I was in Oldham the other day, and I think Oldham has a relatively large percentage of people who are on out of work benefits.
Yeah.
And for reasons I won't get into, I met some very nice people, and some of them I know are on, you know, some form of pretty heavy out of work benefits. They're not working, and I know
Mm.
that some of them are perfectly capable of working, perfectly
Yeah.
capable, and could be working. So there's definitely, okay, it's anecdote, but I'm kind of just trying to paint a picture that we know. There's no way that there's 6 odd million, whatever exactly the number is, of people who can't work. I do think, however, that there are some who can't, of course, and you want the British state to look after those people who are unfortunate enough that they genuinely can't work, but that's just not 6 million or 9 million or whatever numbers you want to draw on. But there is a certain mentality in Britain, and it's not uncommon for people to think, well, if these people are saying they can't work, then we've got to take their word for it. And it's because of COVID,
Mm.
and it's because the NHS is broken.
Mm.
Those are the reasons why these people can't work, and they need to be looked after and have a good quality of life, because we all only live once, and
Mm.
we all get delivered the hand we're delivered.
Mm.
And so if they're in a bad situation as they claim they are, they should still be able to lead a good life in a country such as the UK.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. I mean, we learned a lot. I mean, first on the details. So you want a welfare state that looks after people in need, and some people are disabled and need help, and just because of their condition. That's undeniable. But you have millions of people now who are presenting as with mental health issues, particularly young people. A lot of young people are presenting with mental health issues, and the state's basically writing them off, I think. And it's connected with COVID. It's connected with I'll mention that in a second. But the problem with it is, as a model, is that if you have two houses that are neighbouring each other, if one person gets on all four of the big benefits, universal credit, housing benefit, disability allowance, and PIPs, if you're on all four, you will receive probably several £1,000s more per annum than someone working full time on the minimum wage. And I don't think that can be justified in any way. I think that you can't have people working full time next to someone that's not working, and the person that isn't working at all is better off than them. I think that's just something tells me that that's a system that isn't functioning properly. But I think it is. I think it is connected to COVID in that I think obviously there's a massive tail effect from COVID anyway on mental health and stress. But I think COVID, it was fascinating. Personality types were very interesting, which you students would be interested in. So what we learned in COVID was that of the 100% of people that go to the office, about 80% didn't mind, probably 50% liked it and wanted the human interaction. What we learned was that maybe a personality type, maybe it's big five, they about 20% of people hated it. Really, it stressed them. They hated the stress of going traveling to work and being in work, and they preferred, we found this out, they preferred to live on their own in the house. And I sort of said at the time, there's probably about 15% of the public who would prefer just to stay at home and not work and have the state send them sort of tin mackerel and oats and never, and sardines, never don't bother me again. And we found that out, and that sort of was revealed, if you like. It was a revealed characteristic. And I think, but another thing COVID did, which was very dangerous, the government's response was very dangerous in that it gave people the idea that it was possible that a state like ours could simply pay them to do nothing. I mean, it was almost like a Pandora's box. It's like it moved, it shifted the. People say, hold on, the government's just going to spend 450 billion on various programs, and I just go stay at home and do nothing. And I think people get a taste for it. I think some people just got used to that, and we haven't got them out. But I think it's cruel, particularly the young, for the state not to have some incentive and some stick, as it were, as well as a carrot, to get people out into work. And I think I would make it a condition for people to get out into training or work, even if it's just a day, because your mental health would improve. You meet people, you get your confidence back, and that's a solution. What isn't a solution is pretending the state's rich enough to just condemn people for a life of 40 years on benefits. Completely, it's impossible. And the markets, I mean, the bond markets in the end will decide this. I mean, I would love a government that was sensible enough. But the Labour government tried to do some modest welfare reform, and the backbenchers wouldn't do it, because the backbenchers are so frankly infantile and innumerate that they weren't having it. So I'm afraid it may be the 30-year yield that decides it in the end.
Yes. Well, we may come on to that, but I agree with you. And I think even if we could, as a state, afford to do it, and I think you'll agree with this, it still wouldn't be a good idea to do it, because most people aren't happy constantly out of work. They're not. I mean, some people will be, and obviously there's childcare, so people may go full-time childcare. That's a separate issue. But in terms of young people trying to get into the workplace and get going, actually to get up each morning and either work from home or work in the office or work in the factory or whatever, even though it sucks a bit, particularly on Monday morning, is better long-term for them as individuals than it is to be out of work and just, twiddling their thumbs or playing on their Xboxes or whatever people do these days. And even if you have MPs who really, their gut reaction is that they want to help and protect, and they see vulnerability everywhere, they should see that a response to that should be to encourage, where possible, people to go into work. So there's kind of a double error going on there, I think. First of all, they overestimate how many people really can't go into work and or need help. And secondly, they're not seeing part of the solution is to get them into work. They just want to pay them off. It's always money, money, money. So I agree. There's a massive problem there, and the government can't. It's ironic because the government has this massive majority in the House of Commons. So it should be able to really push through some radical changes, particularly in the first 2 years of the government, because it's got another 3 years, let's say 2.5, 3 years after that, to then sort of recover the situation. Things can get worse before they get better. So it pushes through these big policy changes, and after 2 or 3 years, the country starts working better, just in time for the next election. They get re-elected. That's what's supposed to happen. But they can't do anything. I mean, it seems that they're completely stuck. Listen, I've goaded you with that, but we might come back to it. But I've got so many questions and so little of your precious time. I want to try and make this. I'm probably going to fail, but I'm going to try and make this. I'm just looking at my notes here, a quick fire round, okay, regarding the SDP policy. So I had a look at the SDP 2024 manifesto online. which was a genuinely enjoyable read. I'm not just saying that to be polite. Most people don't want to read manifestos. They're not the most exciting prospect on a Sunday morning or elsewhere. But actually, I found it very readable. That may be the case for other parties' manifestos as well. But anyway, and it was all nicely bite-sized into different areas, defence or education or the family or whatever you fancy looking at, with a nice little opening spiel and then some more detail. So I had a look through that. I would say, and maybe I'm wrong, it's my subjective opinion, William, but I would say that broadly speaking, the SDP reflects the majority of the country's view broadly about things. So, for example, things have got a bit silly in terms of the economy. We're overspending too much per month. Things have got silly in terms of levels of migration. Migration is great, but you can have too much of it. Okay, so but there are a number of things a number of quick fire questions. I'm going to see if we can do this quickly. A few points that came to my mind, some of which were present in the document and some may not have been. Now, if I've missed them, forgive me, but it doesn't matter too much either way. So quick fire, if you can. Death penalty. Position of the SDP on death penalty.
Against. Actually, it's one of the three. I'm personally against it. And it's one of the three things that we've arguably tactically made a conscience issue. So assisted suicide, I'm against. I'm against death penalty, and I'm in favour of reducing term limits on abortion. I'm not in favour of decriminalising of criminalising abortion. But with those three things, I've left it to members to decide. We haven't published policy on it, but the SDP is not in favour of the death penalty.
And euthanasia, you're broadly against that too.
I'm against that personally. Again, we haven't. I mean, some members want us to publish policy on it, but I always argue, it's the quickest way to halve the party. Sure. I'd always argue for it to remain a conscience issue. I'm implacably against it. I spoke against it throughout the campaign.
Okay, so briefly on that, I suppose it's supposed to be quick fire, but it's hard to do quick fire, but we'll try. But just briefly on that, so you have somebody who's terminally ill, they've got motor neurone disease, they're stuck in a wheelchair, their arms don't even work anymore. They've had enough. Are they allowed to go or no?
Well, the present system is that the hospice movement treats them and looks after them, and that I would argue that broadly speaking that works. And if you speak to clinicians, they'd argue that it does work. There's lots of interventions you can make and lots of pain relief. What I'm worried about is a slippery slope and some harrowing cases of young people presenting with mental health distress, which can be transitory, as we know, and saying I just want to give up and will the state take my life, and I can't have that.
I guess I hear you. I guess the utilitarian argument would be, how many young people, for example, or people who really shouldn't be involved in euthanasia are doing that or going to do that relative to the number of people who are in deep distress. Their lives aren't worth living by their viewpoint. And you could probably objectively assess that their life standard is very, very poor. They want to check out, to put it that way. What's the ratio of the two? Because you're never going to get perfection.
I accept that point. I think the ratio would be, very, very different. I accept that, but I think I'm still against the fact is, if we get into a situation where it becomes when things become culturally, when the window is opened culturally to a practice of checking out early, no one is going to persuade me that grandma or granddad are going to say, I feel a bit of a burden now. The state's going to take my house off me, and so on. I'll just check out early. I think that will become practice. I mean, that will, informally, I think it'll actually happen, and that's not a world that I want to envisage, to be honest. I think people do, and I watched the debates, and there were some good contributions on both sides. But people underestimate how effective the hospice movement now is in dealing with this issue. And certainly on pathway drugs, you could argue it's quite close to what some of the advocates wanted anyway now. Because some of the pathway drugs you can't get back from.
Tariffs. Now, this is my question, actually, because I think, forgive me if I'm wrong here, I think I've heard you say that you, in some senses, like tariffs, and you're more on the side of pro-Trump tariffs. I'm not saying entirely, than most, let's say, economists are. Most economists are saying, look, in the end, tariffs don't work. It raises the costs for everyone. But you, I think, have a counter argument about tariffs.
Well, it does. I mean, I'm just observing the fact that firstly, it's nothing new. I mean, people are there's a sort of consensus among most politicians in the West until quite recently in America, that the pure free trade purism and an open free trade, which is actually quite a utopian idea, by the way, very, very utopian idea, to have global free trade, but they think that that's normal, and they deny history. So if you go back to the Corn Laws, or you go back to Chamberlain or Lord Birkenhead arguing for protection, put it crudely, if you're going to win the war of manufacturing, you will be in favor of free trade. So the dominant states in manufacturing, the ones that can win the game, will be in favor of free trade, and the ones that might be hurt by losing it ought to think about alternatives. And so my point is that having free traded our way into colossal trade deficits, which imply, because you've got very few politicians talk about international trade mathematics, but you can only pay for your imports in three ways. You can export something, or you can sell something you've already got, or you can issue debt. Those are the three ways. We don't export enough to pay for them, so the other two categories come into it. And we're just selling our assets every single year by 100 billion is roughly the trade deficit. So you just it's beggaring. And all I'm saying is that you can't continue that. It's completely stupid to continue that, and the cost to your society more broadly by continuing that sort of level of deindustrialization is strategically foolish, because you're in the end you're a total supplicant to the people that are supplying you important primary products like steel and food. But you also gut your industries, and the States and the United Kingdom have both seen this. I mean, you mentioned a northern town there. With most northern cities from the Midlands to the north have 20% of adults on some form of benefits, and you've got opioid epidemics and massive social problems. I argue it would have been cheaper to keep the factories open, and I think you can't sit back and do nothing. So doing nothing is not an option, I'm afraid. I favour industrial policy and tariffs rationally. And if you want to have a look at it, go to the SDP website, and we've got a debate, and I've written on it. So that's my case. I'm with Vance and Trump on this.
Wealth tax.
Yeah, we've got them. Yeah, it's strange, really. I mean, we've got a progressive tax system, and we do tax assets. The people pay effectively a tax on their properties through community charge and council tax. And so the first thing when people say I want a wealth tax, I say, well, define it. What are you talking about? If you look at the tax yield from the top 1 or 10% of employees, it's absolutely colossal. In fact, the real problem with the tax system isn't so much that they don't pay enough, although there are some categories you could probably squeeze more out. But it's the 50. The last time I looked, you have to get to the 57th percentile to find a net contributor. So a lot of it's the middle that's been hollowed out. And again, I think it gets back to trade and production. We used to have an economy based on production and exporting and actually making tangible things and actually generating power. And we don't. We have an economy that's based on debt and the City of London, which is services. So I think those are the key issues which I'd look at.
Inheritance tax.
Yeah, I'm in favour of it. We have it. I think most states charge it. I'm not in favour of abolishing it personally. We're not in favour of abolishing it as a party.
Is it fair to tax people after death on things they've already been taxed on prior?
I think it's the extent to which to say that the state shouldn't tax people's estates at all is quite radical. Most states do. I think the people that go around saying, and you can find them, that the state should take everything, is totally ridiculous. Most people's motives in life are to build up assets that they can hand on to their loved ones and their family, or give to charity, whatever. It's their money, it's their estate, they earned it. But at a reasonable level with limits, I think the state can tax them.
Fertility levels in the UK, I think that's not mentioned in the manifesto. Perhaps there's no reason why it should. I don't know, but it's a looming issue, the next big issue. We know that fertility rates in the UK are way below 2 now, as they are actually across the developed world, bar maybe Israel and a couple of other countries.
Yeah.
But anyway, focusing on Britain, because this is where we both live, I think. They're down to maybe 1.4. I think it depends on the stat that you look at. So that's really bad, actually, just to be clear to people. Very, very quick. Well, it's very bad in terms of an imminent reduction in population size, disregarding migration.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a problem, and do you think government should get involved with trying to, in inverted commas, fix it?
I think it's a massive, massive problem. I think civilizationally significant. I think, yeah, you're quite right. On the maths, just have a look at the work of Paul Morland or any good demographer, and you'll see that once societies, the TFR gets, I mean, it's 2.1 to reproduce yourself, and once you start collapsing down to 1.4 or 1.2, you're in a spiral, and you're unlikely to get out of it. In fact, the demographers will say that pretty much no society in history has ever got out of it that's down there, and that's where we are. So it should be a political issue. I'm it's faith, flag, and family in the SDP. We're pro-natalist and pro-parents. Motherhood and fatherhood is very important. Families, we talk about that a lot in the foundational document. It's the family is the foundation of society. But I'm realistic about what governments can do, and I think Hungarian governments put a lot of money into housing and benefits for third children. Made a little bit of a difference, and it can do. Part of my family is South Korean, and the South Koreans have the worst TFR pretty much in the developed world. It's catastrophic what's going to happen to South Korea. The population would just half back from sort of 50 odd million, 25, 12, if nothing else happens. And they also are very rich, and they've spent about $500 billion trying to deal with it, and it's not been successful. And I'm just going to cut to the chase and say what it's about. Unless you can change the social status of motherhood in particular, but parenthood in general, but motherhood in particular, you won't solve it. So as long as that stays how it is, I don't think you'll see a change to TFR. And that may be happening. Maybe things are stirring in the United States, maybe things change, but unless you can change that, then on the data, the TFR will remain below 2. And it's not so much average family size of the people that have children in Britain hasn't changed massively since the 70s. What's happened is a very large category of women having no kids at all. And that really does change your TFR if that happens. So there you go.
So here's an alternative viewpoint. I think I'm never quite sure whether I'm playing devil's advocate with this or not. It may be the case that the key cause of this rapid reduction in fertility rates is let's call it broadly, a biological response, an innate response to a perception by women or adults that the world is benign, and therefore there's not a drive to reproduce in the way that there was before. Now, if that's the case, or it's the major factor, there's little that governments can do. And as you point out with Hungary, which I'm somewhat aware of, and you've also mentioned South Korea, they've tried very hard and haven't moved the dial very much. Loosely, that would support the hypothesis that this is an innate response to growing up in an environment where there's very low child mortality, etc. There just isn't that drive to have lots of children. However, at the same time, is it clear that this is disastrous? Because as we move into a world that really is quite Android driven, I mean, we've got AI, okay, androids are moving robots, sure, but we can see, I think already, jobs being taken off our hands and put into the hands of ChatGPT or whatever. Actually, are we moving into a period of human existence where we don't need so many people, because a lot of the jobs to generate that productivity that we've talked about comes a lot from the machines? So actually, we could see, it may be very fortunate timing, a reduction in population because people are choosing to have less children at a population level. And that coincides with AI taking on the reins of a lot of the productivity of a country. So that South Korea and Japan, who are sort of stereotypically thought of as being extremely technologically advanced and could be ahead of everyone in terms of these sort of AI things, maybe with America, they're having these rapid reductions in population size, but in the end, it may balance out. They may not see a big drop in GDP.
I think I take a lot of what you say there, but I think it depends where you are and it depends which situation you are. I'd back South Korea and Japan surviving as civilizations of productive, well-organized states. My problem in Europe is that you've got very, very large population change. And I think the consequence, the liberals that say, well, just ship new people in, it doesn't matter. It's wrong about human nature and culture migrating. Culture migrates, and what will happen in Europe is you'll have a highly atomized, very dysfunctional, antagonistic society that, if you believe people like David Betts, could descend into civil war. So that is not a stable or desirable situation. So I think, and bear in mind that there's no democratic mandate for this policy which they're indulging. I think whatever your views on the technological side, which I take many of your points, you can't be optimistic about the civilizational side in respect of the West.
So we've talked quite a lot about migration. This is a key issue for the Reform Party. If I were to map on, you're probably going to wince at this. If I were to map on the SDP manifesto to the Reform, well, they don't quite call it a manifesto, pledge, but whatever it's called, contract, but same thing. Of course, they don't completely align. Of course, they don't. But they do in many areas. Could you highlight what 2 or 3, let's say, max, key differences are, the key differences between the Reform Party's stance on political stance and SDP's political stance?
Well, we dealt with one. I'll make a broad point first. So most of your listeners and undergraduates and so on would be aware of the political compass, which you can take a test on a sort of left-wing, right-wing scale and an authoritarian libertarian scale as well, and see where you end up. And we're the only party in the top left. We are, pretty left on economics actually on the face of it. And Reform isn't even in that quadrant. It's probably a libertarian small state society. It's not as authoritarian as us, and it's not as socially conservative as us. But you mentioned the big one, trade. I don't know what the Reform policy on trade is, probably because they don't. I mean, instinctively, they'll be very, very free tradey. But as I say, that doesn't work. And then other big things. I mean, people have said this. I mean, I probably might be the only person in history that's ever done an electoral pact with Reform successfully, because there may not be one in the future. We did one on 24 seats last time, quite small, didn't get much attention, but we did it. And people say, why don't you just join them? Well, virtually all the economics is different. I mean, we've just published an energy abundance paper. Our diagnosis of the problem with why do we have high energy prices? Why is it causing industrialization? It's because we abandoned planning. We had sort of Thatcherite utopian views that the state would, the market would just do it. The state doesn't have to plan anything. Well, that's just not right. It's utterly disastrous. And the solution is for the state to get back in the business of energy generation and transmission. I'm not sure Reform would really want that. They have, to be fair to them, they have moved a little bit, as some of the privatizations that the Conservatives did in the 80s and 90s have proved to be disastrous, like water, for instance, Thames Water, disastrous, and railways. You can hardly get a franchise away now. They have moved on those, and so they may be patriotic enough to think that, if you want the state to run the railways, it should be the British state and not be the Dutch or the French or the German or Italian states, which is what we have. So they might come to our position on that. And on water, it's just a no-brainer. You've got debt. You've got Thames Water used as a debt mule. 18 billion of debt in it now. Some of it's very expensive. You've got profits siphoned abroad to foreign owners. It's just catastrophic for a natural monopoly. So if there are differences, they are primarily on the economics, and my problem with it is that you looked at our manifesto. There are about 20 chapters on it that we disagree with on the free trade Thatcherite economics that Reform has, and on the social side and on the sort of some of the other sides. I think we're much more socially conservative than Reform, actually. I think we are. I think they're quite libertarian in outlook. And so we're, if
Can you
anything,
give me an
probably,
example? Can you give me just one example there?
well, I mean, look, the biggest example is on immigration policy, where we've advocated the use of Ascension Island to stop the flow flat overnight. Just build an offshore detention facility, get out of the ECHR and all the protocols. We've been arguing this for 5 years, and it's taken a long, long time for them to come towards our position. And when we started arguing this, it seemed to be quite edgy. But we just looked at the data and thought, what's going to solve it? So that's an example. But there are others probably. I mean, I don't think they took, and again we had our strapline family community nation, and they basically just lifted it, and then, so they use family community country. But I hadn't heard many of them talk very much about family policy. And
Okay.
we've talked about it consistently, and I think it's vitally important to understand it. So we've described ourselves as social conservatives, and I would stick to that. And so we're probably more socially conservative than them, although it is moving, so we'll wait and see.
What what what's the best sort of practice for a party such as the SDP? So you got up to 4 years until the next election, maybe three
Mm,
and a half or something, but whatever, a long
mm,
time to go.
mm,
And put out policies and ideas. But of course, other parties can nick your ideas or just
mm.
change nation to country and all this sort of business. So is that good or bad when that happens? And when it does happen, as you describe this kind of flux of another party, such as Reform, it could be other parties too, and you see them ebbing and flowing in terms of their policies, and sometimes they're coming closer to SDP policies. Is
Yeah.
there a point where you sort of say, right, here we're close enough where I want to do a deal with them, whatever a deal is, in what situation? And here's a situation where we're not very close to other parties and we want to keep absolutely separate. And how much do you keep ideas close to your chest, and how much do you want to get your ideas out there? Because actually, it's better if other parties take them on, even if that kind of takes away some of the edge that you then have as a party.
Well, if you're realistic, Reform have a decent chance of doing very well at the next election, could even be form a government. And for the country's sake, I would want them to take all of our policies that are sensible and good for the country. Obviously, I'm not jealous of it in that sense. And I've even said, on things like Ascension, take it. I mean, I've actually not just done that, where I've debated, Richard Tice over a meal and said, this is the solution to it. You should look at it. So I'm not, for the country's sake, I want any of these things to go, because I think we depend on them. So we'll just have to wait and see. We will continue doing the work we're doing, detailed policy work, and if people like the ideas and and so on, they'll take it. I think the scale of the reform juggernaut is huge. I think the country don't are not they're so disenchanted with the establishment parties that they. And by the way, I think Labour has more is in a more vulnerable position than the Tories. I mean, people don't seem to grasp this, but the Tories can only really recover. I mean, they're down at 16% or whatever. They can only probably recover from that. But I think the Labour Party could go down. I mean, they're in government. They're going to get blamed for all of the things that go wrong. So they're extremely vulnerable. And so I can totally understand the public's inclination to go for something different. It's perfectly rational. And I hope they succeed in breaking the two-party system. If they do so, it'll probably be very useful for the SDP.
Hmm. Do you predict defections from Labour MPs to Reform?
I think that's hard. I think because of this. I mean, as the history of the SDP proves, actually in the 80s, I think self-interest can be a motivator in this. So I don't think it's all ideological. Danny Kruger going was an interesting one because he's probably closest to us of any Tory MP, I would say. And I know him and respect him. He's very good. That was a very good signing for Reform if it holds. But just looking at their actual political background and their ideology, I think there are far fewer. I count about 5 or 6 Labour MPs that are quite close, say, to the SDP's sort of fairly traditional Labour viewpoint. So I think there are fewer. There may be some There may be some. We'll have to wait and see. But it's not clear because it's such a long way out. It's not clear that Nigel will be there in 4 years' time, still heading this party, and it'll be in the same position. It's in a state of flux, and I don't think any of us really knows. All you can do, as I've said to the SDP members and our national committee, is that you've just got to row your own boat, see what happens.
Indeed, indeed. My friend Sam, he's not a student, but he's a friend of mine. He feels politically homeless. He's quite miserable about this. He says he might be a little bit right of centre on social stuff. He feels a bit more conservatism with a small c is necessary under the current circumstances. Okay, but he's left of centre, I think, economically. Okay, so that might suit very broadly the SDP, and he has looked at the SDP manifesto. But here's the but: his number one concern, I think, I'm pretty confident, his number one concern is climate change, and he is a strong proponent of focusing on reducing carbon emissions by the UK. He sees the world going to hell in a handcart, as they say, unless we do something now. And I think that's where he would look at the SDP manifesto and feel that he couldn't engage.
Well, I think that's a mistake. I think we want to decarbonize, but we don't think that wrecking your economy and your society in pursuit of that, particularly in the short term, is sensible at all. I think that's reckless. And I think if you read the energy green paper we just published, it couldn't be clearer. The hydrocarbons and even the coal and gas that we propose to use to get to a base load capable of providing unfluctuating, reliable power, which is nuclear, you've got to have a pathway there. You can't. It doesn't exist now. I mean, we're burning gas now. It's disastrous. And by the way, we're importing the gas. We're burning. So not only are we burning it, but we're beggaring ourselves doing it. So we're proposing, 60 gigawatts of new nuclear base load, and it couldn't be clearer. That will solve the problem. So we do address the issue, because you can't propose something like that. I'm very skeptical about net zero in terms of the damage to the economy, and I'm very skeptical about just the base intermittency. People seem to be on it, and we talked earlier about people's inability ideologically to accept what's in front of them on immigration, on housing. The two are interrelated. Well, this is a classic example. I mean, people don't, people haven't been able to, the government, Miliband, has not been able to answer the question, what you do when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. And what we do is we burn gas, we import grid energy from France's dwindling nuclear baseload facility. So, you've got to address this properly. So I think we've got the right balance here. I really do. And I'll just say finally, we're certainly not climate change deniers. Climate change is a fact, absolute fact, and the contribution of human activity to it is there. I mean, we've produced CO2. What do you expect it will do? I don't think it can be denied. But I think you've also got to be realistic about what other states do. And I think, given the fact that we're below 1% of emissions, it's simply wishful thinking to think you can determine what will happen on a macro scale globally on this issue. You just won't.
It does seem hubristic. I have to say, the idea that other countries will follow what Britain does, actually, particularly when at the moment our energy policy is making us less competitive, so it's damaging our economy. And we all know, from our own experiences, we have very high electricity and gas bills, and it turns out that they are higher than any other comparator country, any other Western country. And of course, that's not just the bill for you and I heating our homes now it's September time, but it's the bill for the pub to heat. It's the bill for the person driving the van. It's the bill for the arc furnace. It's the to maintain that. It's the bill for any business or person that uses energy, which is everybody. And so, yes, there are. it's very, very unclear that other countries will seek to follow Britain's lead.
But it's also slightly dishonest and disingenuous, because the products we buy from the Chinese EVs that are storming the market because they're a third cheaper, to the everyday products that you'll buy on the shelves of supermarkets or other retailers are imported, and they're laden with dirty output. So you offshoring this stuff and pretending that you've gone net zero when you're still addicted to mass importation of goods that are produced without our environmental standards is not you're not being honest. I'm afraid you're just not being honest, realistic.
It's a good point. William, I could genuinely chat with you all day, probably all week. I shan't do that to you, of course. But I would like to ask you one more question, which is becoming a kind of a question that I'm asking everybody I've had the chance to put questions to. You're an erudite chap and an eloquent speaker, and you've got a very important voice to present in terms of political discussion. We touched on this already, but I wonder if we could just dig into it just a little bit more for a moment. What opportunities do you have day to day, week to week, month to month, to influence, or anyway, to speak to those people who presently are in positions of power? You're saying all these things, they make a lot of sense. When do you get the opportunity for people to hear your view so that maybe they will put them into action?
It's a good question. That's a very interesting question. We are much more influential than our votes or our profile would indicate, actually. And if you're a sensible party and you produce good work, then you'd be surprised how, when you throw a rock into the pool, the ripples literally go everywhere. And actually, SW1 politics and the media around politics and think tanks is actually quite a small. Quite a small environment. So one of the jobs that I wanted to do when I started reviving the party, after meeting David Owen again after or around Brexit and then post that, was just the public that didn't know about us. But the first thing I wanted to do was to have the political universe, an ecosystem, know us, and they do know, actually. They do, and so I would say, are we influential? Well, you publish an energy abundance green paper one week, and then Michael Gove does a long piece about how to cure the country's problems, and he mentions the words energy abundance. Probably not a freak act, Yeah, so I think these things do, and as I say, I know we've Reform are all over us. I mean, that Reform have had a very, very good look at us, and we got to know each other very well when we did the Reform SDP electoral pact. So could I say, well, it's not just the slogan on things like water nationalisation and probably railways. We've probably influenced them. So I'd take that. So I would answer much more than people realise, and we do know. I mean, present leader of the Tory party I've met a few times. And I actually think, put on a personal level, she's very engaging, and she probably is slightly underrated in the betting now. So we'll wait and see.
Excellent. No, that's great to hear. That's really good to hear. Well, William, thank you so much for your time today. But the last thing, actually, where can people find more William and more SDP?
Well, so they can find me on X. It used to be called Twitter, and it's a fairly. I mean, I don't particularly like X. I must warn people. So you'll get a slightly cruder version of William on X, because the way X is, So if I tweet on housing or economics, it doesn't really go very far. So it's a little bit spicy on X. But you can find me on X, William Clouston, or the best place really is to go to YouTube and to look at the SDP's YouTube account there, and you've got all the interviews that I do on television and one-to-one interviews that I've done are all on there. And then finally, the SDP's website, which is sdp.org.uk, and all our stuff's on there. Have a look, check us out.
Wonderful. Am I right in saying you have a regular or semi-regular spot with Mike Graham on the radio?
Yeah, it's slightly informal. It's actually when I'm in town. I mean, I live in Northumberland, and I divide my time between Northumberland and Orkney, so it's not ideal really. But I have to work in London, so I get down 3 times a month usually, and at least once or twice in those trips I'll try and fit in, and it's a great spot. So it's been great for us, and I've got a great deal of admiration for Mike and his team.
Wonderful. William, thank you again for your time today.
Pleasure. Great. Take care. Thank you.